Okay, welcome back. When we left off, we were talking about inventories. So what I want to do is I want to go to the Moodle site for class. If you look on the site, there are some samples of inventories. If you go down to here we go, the resources for this session. There's a document called Online MI and Learning Styles Inventories, which is, when you click on it, it opens up to this. So if you click on these links, if you do Control and click, it should open up in a new window. Let's try it again. Did it open? Nope, not yet. There we go. Now it's working. This is a learning styles inventory, which you can do online. Start the free online learning styles inventory, so you can do that. Just do it online. There are multiple intelligences inventories. So if you click on this, this will give you a multiple intelligences inventory that you do online. You just click on the buttons. It is rather long, but what I would suggest is if you have a younger child, read it to them so that they can finish it. You really need to finish this all in one sitting. Ask the student just to think about the answers in general, not about a specific academic area. It should take no more than 10 or 15 minutes for somebody to do this. When you're finished with it, you get a nice graphic and a printout of what the students' multiple intelligences strengths are, what their preferred intelligences are. I'm not going to click on each and every one of these, but there's a learning styles inventory, and there are 2 examples of multiple intelligences inventory. If you don't like any of those, what you can do is you can use your buddy Google or his cousin Safari or the stepsister Bing, and you can just search for a free online multiple intelligence test right there. And you can see there's one on Edutopia, there's a Birmingham grid for learning for secondary students. This is the one that we just looked at. You can feel free to use anything from the internet. If you use if you use something that is not one of the ones I gave you, please include where you got it from. The reason being, I might want to use it for subsequent classes. So if, let's say, for instance, you use this one from Edutopia, include this link underneath it so that I know that's where you got it from. What you're going to need to do for your student profile and for your total talent portfolio, so for working with your student with disabilities and working with your gifted student, you need to have the multiple intelligences inventory. So if you do it online, make sure you print that results section so that I can see it, to see that you have analyzed the information correctly. If you do a paper copy, just scan and include the whole thing. So plenty of learning styles inventories there. There are also lots of interest inventories. So there are several interest inventories here that I've used. We'll talk about those in a minute. If we go back to the Prezi. So that's for learning preferences. So for both the student profile and the total talent portfolio, you need to do some kind of a learning preferences inventory. I would suggest multiple intelligences. That's going to give you more usable information, especially when we start talking about differentiating your lessons. Then we need to talk about interests. Many teachers will differentiate instruction based on student learning needs, their learning profile, They will also differentiate their instruction on multiple intelligences. Most teachers, if they differentiate on multiple intelligences, will incorporate that into some kind of a choice board for students that they can show that they've learned something in different ways. You may give students the option of writing a story, or using a comic book story strip, or doing a felt board story. That's really differentiating using multiple intelligences. But what most teachers don't do is that first step of doing an inventory to target the choices that they do for students. So some teachers will differentiate, not as sophisticated as you will be able to do, but they will differentiate by multiple intelligences. The most often neglected area of differentiation is differentiating by student choice, allowing students to choose something based on their interest, or designing a lesson specifically with a student interest in mind. That's really important for a variety of reasons, to get to know your students. And one of the most telling things is a recent study that I heard about on NPR talked about a group of educators who interviewed students, middle school students in Europe and in the United States, and also in some Asian countries. I believe the Philippines and Japan. So they interviewed all of these students, and one of the questions they asked was, can you describe your schooling in one word? And what a lot of the European and Asian students said was that they found their school challenging, they found their school fun, they found their school engaging. Hard was also another word. The most common used word to describe American schools was boring. Many of our students are bored. We have a very broad curriculum that kind of touches on the surface of a lot of things. Students don't often get the opportunity to dig deep into content. And given the content that we are expected to deliver, sometimes that is very difficult. One of the easiest things to do is to incorporate student choice into the curriculum, so that they do feel more engaged and more invested in the learning. So we need to do some kind of an interest inventory to be able to get to know our students, what makes them tick. And what you can do is, if you are here, there's lots and lots of different interest inventories. Let me just click on one to kind of show you what one looks like. Oh, unable to open it. Let's try this one. I'm not sure it's opening. There it goes. And that doesn't take us to the right thing. Oh no, I did just check these a couple weeks ago. There we go, that one works. So a student interest inventory looks something like this. It's basically just a questionnaire where you're asking students about things that are important to them. Their favorite movies, song, books. If they had $1 million, what would they do? You can feel free to make one up if you want to. What I want you to do is if you make one up, that's fine. If you use something that you found on the internet or in a book, make sure you give me information about where you got it. I'm not requiring you to write an APA citation, but I would like you to just tell me where you got it from. There are samples of interest inventories. There's one right here that is on your Moodle site. This is from the book written by Diane Hecox that I used to use for class, but I no longer do. It is, she's the person that wrote the chapter that you're going to read about tiering, which we'll probably do for our next session. So an interest inventory, the purpose of it is to help you to understand things that your student is interested in. So you need to do an interest inventory or something along those lines for the student profile. If you're working with a young student, or if you are working with a student that has a disability in the area of literacy, you have a couple of options. You can ask the student the questions on the inventory and write down their answers. Or you can do an oral interest inventory in which you write down a set of questions that you are going to ask the student, and then you do an interview. You ask them the questions and you write down their answers, more like a conversation. If you do a conversation or an interest inventory interview, you have to give me what the exact questions were that you asked the student and what his or her answers were, so that I can ensure that you have incorporated their interests into one of your lessons that you're going to write. So let me close all of these so we don't slow my computer down anymore. Okay. If you are, oh, where's the other ones I was going to show you guys? It's not what I want. This is the interest inventory I just clicked on. There's also something called the primary, that says primary interest inventory. This is very long, but it's actually several inventories. The first thing is the interest inventory, written by Siegel. The next thing says primary interest analyzer. The interest analyzer was created by Joe Renzulli, who also created the Total Talent Portfolio. So for the TTP, you must do an interest analyzer. There is an example here of a primary version. And if you scroll through, you will see yes, it's rather long, but kids actually like to do this. The secondary interest analyzer, which was written by some other people and Joe Renzulli. So it's basically getting at the same information. It's just written at a different comprehension level. So for the Total Talent Portfolio, you have to use one of those. Those are also under assignments. Nope. Resources for TTP. So when you open that up, you will see there are some interest inventories there. Multiple intelligences checklist, multiple intelligences inventory, multiple intelligences test. The primary interest analyzer. There's a specific one for literacy. I do teach this class to the students in the Masters in Literacy program as well, so they tend to want to do that one. You can use it even if literacy isn't your area. It is actually a pretty good inventory to use. It focuses on reading. So if you're looking at writing your lessons and in some kind of area of literature or English or poetry, you might want to use this reading interest analyzer. Okay. Go back to full screen. So there's plenty of options for you for inventories. And what we're going to do for the Zoom session on Friday is go over each of the projects in depth and answer any questions that you have. And again, I will record that session so that if you cannot attend on Friday at 11, you will be able to, or at 10, you will be able to see the recording. Okay. I do want to talk about gender a little bit. Gender is not technically one of the areas that we consider when we differentiate, but I think it's important that we understand that boys and girls do learn differently. And I want you to think about the gender of most of your teachers that you had in school was probably female. So, and most of you in the class are female. So what we tend to do is we tend to teach the way we learn best, and we need to think about the special learning needs of boys. Now, I do focus on boys because it seems to me that most people in education know that girls have been neglected in the area of math, science, and technology for years. There have been massive strides made in STEM education for girls and in getting girls involved in STEM careers. Research shows that more and more girls now are in college, especially in those areas where they were most often underrepresented. So what I want to talk about is what we need to think about when we think about boys. All of this information that I'm going to give you in the next couple of slides is based in research in gender education in elementary schools primarily. When we enter school, girls perform equal to or better than boys on almost every measure of achievement. But by the time we're done with school, boys have fallen significantly behind. So we start out the same, but then our formal education system does a better job at girls than it does at boys. Boys earn 70% of the D's and F's that teachers give out. They make up to 2/3 of students labeled as learning disabled. They account for 80% of high school dropouts and 80% of kids diagnosed with ADD or ADHD are boys. Now, I tend to believe that there's not something that genetically different about boys. If we think about it, D's and F's are primarily based on the amount of work that you do. 2/3 of students being labeled as learning disabled. Learning disabled is one of those softer, as we say, categories of disability. It's not as though 2/3 of students with cerebral palsy are boys, or 2/3 of students with, because cerebral palsy does not have a gender issue. Autism does tend to have a gender issue. There are more boys labeled as autistic than girls. But being learning disabled means that a teacher usually at some point in time targeted you, for lack of a better term, or labeled you as having some difficulties learning. What we do is we teach literacy skills at a very, very young age. And developmentally, boys are not quite ready for reading at the same time girls are. So we're trying to teach them things before they are ready for them. Whoops, I skipped one. We know that girls lag behind in areas of math and science. They also lag behind males slightly in attaining advanced degrees in the professions in business and doctorates. Males lag behind by far wider margins than girls do in reading and writing. So the two things that we spend most of our time in elementary school classrooms on are reading and writing. So we're spending the most amount of time having boys do things that they're not quite as good at. And it's also more likely for a woman to choose a traditionally male career than it is for a man to choose a more traditionally female career. It's just the way we have gender stereotypes in the United States. Almost invariably, from elementary school straight on through, girls receive higher grades and higher class ranks and more academic honors in every field except for science and sports. If you're in a classroom now towards the end of the year and your school is having some kind of an awards ceremony, I would strongly encourage you to go, because you will see the gender of the students that go up to get those awards is almost primarily girls. They are the ones that are singled out for those achievement awards generally. This is a very eye-opening study. The number of referrals for special education services for boys was markedly decreased when boys had male teachers. So men out there, you do something right that us females have not quite seemed to grasp. I think you understand boys better. Well, obviously, because you were one at some point in time. So when boys have male teachers, not only do they have fewer referrals for special education services, but their grades also go up. So that there is something to be said about that. What we know about African American boys, that was when they were given a self-esteem test, they see themselves in a pretty positive light, despite the fact that many of these boys had very well documented academic problems. They don't perceive themselves as having difficulty learning. They feel that they learn very well. The academic problems stem from the way that we are defining academic problems and the things that we are having them to do in school. Teachers tend to give boys more attention, whether that be positive or negative. So girls kind of do what they're supposed to do more often, and so they get less attention than boys do. And that's just something to think about. I'm not saying that there's anything that you can do about that, but we need to pay attention to girls just as much as we do to boys. Boys were sometimes told how to solve their own problems, while girls were more likely to have the teacher provide the solution or do the task for them. So if a student comes to a teacher for help, what this means is if the student was a girl, most often the teacher would tell them the answer or do the work for them. Boys were almost always told to figure it out. You need to figure this out, maybe given a little bit of scaffolding, but they're told how to solve the problems. Teachers tended to criticize boys' performance on tasks by saying that they weren't trying hard enough. And this is, again, the same study in New York City that looked at the kind of feedback that teachers were providing to boys and girls. And that is the end of this recording for now. I will add more to this tree simply because I like it when we start talking about how to specifically differentiate lessons through a process called tiering. I will hopefully see all of you tomorrow not all of you, I know I won't see all of you. I will see some of you tomorrow at our Zoom session. And please, please, please watch the recording if you are not able to tune in at that time. Have a wonderful day.